Imagine waking up to the sound of construction, only to discover crews tearing up your land, installing a structure you never approved. That's exactly what happened to me, a 58-year-old homeowner, when the Oakridge Homeowners Association built a fully operational public restroom on the corner of my property, without my knowledge or consent. I was furious. Strangers were casually walking in and out of the facility, treating my land like a public convenience. But what the HOA didn't realize was that they just ignited a nightmare they couldn't control. After 30 years as a city health inspector, I had the knowledge and the resolve to fight back. 3 years ago, I bought a corner lot in Oakridge Estates. It seemed like the perfect place to retire, beautifully landscaped, great road access, and backed by a protected woodland that offered the privacy I had always wanted. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time was how strategic my property's location really was. My corner lot sits at the intersection between our upscale residential community and the main entrance to Eagle Ridge Trail, one of the most popular hiking spots in the county. On weekends, the area draws thousands of visitors eager to enjoy the wilderness and views. For years, the county struggled to provide proper public facilities for these hikers. Budget shortfalls and zoning restrictions stalled any efforts to build restrooms, leaving hikers to either knock on doors or, worse, use the woods. Under the previous HOA president, a retired judge named Howard, things were reasonable. He believed in minimal interference and common sense enforcement. Monthly fees were fair, and we were left in peace. But everything changed when Margaret Thornhill was elected president last year. A former corporate executive with obvious political ambitions, she ran on a platform of modernizing the neighborhood and boosting property values. What she didn't advertise was her husband's ownership of 3 major restaurants located along the trail's access road, businesses that directly benefited from the hiker traffic. Shortly after taking office, Margaret created something called the Community Enhancement Committee. Meetings were held at odd hours, making it nearly impossible for working residents to attend. Rumors swirled about her private meetings with local business owners, but no hard evidence emerged, at least not yet. The first red flag came when the HOA newsletter announced a $25,000 generous donation from the local business association, earmarked for community improvements. The announcement was vague, mentioning only infrastructure upgrades to support our neighborhood's unique appeal. At the quarterly meeting, a few of us asked for specifics. Margaret gave the usual polished response. Everything would follow HOA bylaws and ultimately increase our property values. When I pressed further, she gave a tight smile and said the board would share details at the appropriate time. I should have been more suspicious, but I was preparing for a 2-week visit to my daughter in Arizona to help with her newborn twins. Just before leaving, I saw surveyors near the edge of my property. When I questioned them, they claimed to be county workers doing routine boundary checks. Another lie in what would turn out to be an elaborate scheme. The moment I turned onto my street after returning from Arizona, I knew something was wrong. Cars lined the curb near my lot, something I had never seen before. As I pulled into my driveway, my heart stopped. There, on the corner of my property, stood a brand-new brick building with a curved roof and a sign that read, HOA Restrooms. I slammed on the brakes, convinced I was hallucinating from the long drive. But the structure was real. Roughly 400 square feet, built exactly where my prized Japanese maple trees had stood. The trees were gone, replaced by a gravel path leading to the building's entrance. Even more surreal was the activity around it. Hikers, complete strangers, were using the restrooms, refilling water bottles at a fountain, and relaxing on benches installed near the entrance. Some adjusted their boots or studied trail maps on my land. I parked haphazardly and stormed toward the building, anger rising with every step. A middle-aged couple exiting the facility smiled at me. "Are you with the HOA?" the woman asked. "We just wanted to thank someone for finally putting in decent facilities. It makes such a difference." "This is my property," I stammered, too shocked to form a full sentence. "I didn't approve any of this." They looked confused, then uncomfortable, and quickly walked off. A quick inspection confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't some temporary setup. It was a fully built, permanent structure. Plumbing, electricity, air conditioning units mounted on the rear. Inside were 4 stalls, 2 urinals, sinks with hand dryers, and a drinking fountain. Mounted above each mirror, a plaque reading courtesy of Oakridge Estates HOA. I called Margaret Thornhill immediately, straight to voicemail. I phoned the HOA office, but the receptionist only repeated that all inquiries should be submitted by email. When I explained who I was and that the builder was on my land, she hung up, furious. I inspected further and found a rack near the trail entrance. Inside were glossy brochures advertising Eagle Ridge Trail, with photos of the new restroom on my property prominently displayed. According to the print date, the brochures were made weeks before construction even began. Worst of all was the damage. My carefully landscaped yard was destroyed. The water feature I'd invested thousands into was now a backdrop to the restroom. My privacy fence gone. The restroom had been built entirely along one side of my property to create easier access from the trail. As I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, a county parks department truck pulled up. The driver nodded at me casually as he unlocked a brand new garbage container installed beside the building. "How long has this been here?" I asked him. "Just finished last week," he said. "Record time, too." The HOA got all the approvals pushed through in a single day. Never seen anything move that fast through county bureaucracy. When he drove off, I noticed a small sign posted beside the water fountain. It listed the operating hours, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily, and noted that the facilities were maintained through a community partnership between Oakridge Estates HOA and the County Parks Department. Everything was starting to make sense, and none of it was good. This wasn't some haphazard mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated operation executed while I was away. But why my property? And how had they built an entire facility in less than 2 weeks? Instead of confronting the HOA right away, I spent the next day investigating. A longtime friend who worked at the county records office helped me access documents that revealed the disturbing truth. First, I learned that Margaret Thornhill's husband wasn't just a business owner. He owned the 3 largest hiker-focused establishments near the trailhead: Ridgeview Cafe, Trailhead Brewery, and Summit Snacks. All 3 had reportedly been struggling with slow weekday business. Until now. Minutes from a county tourism board's last meeting told the real story. Trail usage had jumped by 60% since the restroom was installed, with a significant boost in revenue for nearby businesses. The board credited the surge directly to the new, convenient facilities that made the trail more family-friendly and accessible to day trippers. But the most damning evidence came from a contract between the local business association and the HOA. It stipulated a $500 monthly payment to Oakridge Estates for maintenance of the restrooms. This wasn't a public service. It was a revenue-generating operation. Then I found the HOA's own promotional materials, brochures describing my corner lot as the community's contribution to local tourism, as if it were common property available for redevelopment. According to county property records, my lot was chosen precisely for its strategic location, easy trail and road access, and pre-existing water and sewer connections. An internal HOA memo even described it as the ideal site for maximum utility with minimal infrastructure investment. But nothing prepared me for what I found next. An email exchange between Margaret and the construction company dated the day after I left for Arizona. "Property owner departed this morning for a 2-week absence," she wrote. "Expedite all work to ensure completion before his return." They had waited for me to leave, then rushed construction in my absence to present me with a fait accompli, hoping it would be too costly and complicated to undo. Meanwhile, local businesses, including Margaret's husband's restaurants, were profiting from the entire setup, while I was left with strangers parading across my land. The next morning, I returned to my property and found Margaret Thornhill herself standing outside the facility, clipboard in hand. She was surrounded by a group of men in business attire. A banner reading "Grand Opening, Oakridge, Eagle Ridge Partnership" hung between 2 freshly installed lampposts on my property. As I approached, I overheard Margaret addressing the group with her usual polished confidence. She was explaining how this community initiative would increase property values while providing essential services for outdoor recreation. A photographer was snapping pictures as the businessmen shook hands in front of the restrooms. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice cutting through the gathering like a blade. Heads turned. Margaret looked up, and her expression froze, just for a second, before she slipped back into her composed persona. "Robert, welcome home," she said smoothly. "We're just celebrating the completion of our new community amenity. Would you like to say a few words as the hosting property owner?" "Hosting property owner?" I nearly choked on the words. I never agreed to host anything. You built a public toilet on my land without permission. The businessmen exchanged uneasy glances. One of them whispered something to another. Meanwhile, hikers streamed in and out of the restroom, some casting curious looks in our direction, but most behaving as if the building had always been there. "Now, Robert," Margaret said, adopting a patronizing tone, "the HOA has easement rights for community improvements. This is all perfectly legal and properly documented. We sent multiple notices regarding the project." "I never received any such notices," I said. "And no easement gives you the right to build an entire facility on my land." Margaret sighed, as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. The board voted unanimously. This enhancement increases property values across the neighborhood. The added foot traffic benefits local businesses, which improves our community's overall economic health. Just then, a man in an expensive suit stepped forward. "I'm Richard Thornhill, chair of the Business Association," he said. "We're very appreciative of the community's support for this tourism initiative. These facilities were badly needed." So this was Margaret's husband, the one who stood to gain the most from all of this. He even wore a pin bearing the logo of Trailhead Brewery on his lapel. "I don't care what the board voted," I said. "This is my land. You had no right." "Actually, we had every right," Margaret interrupted, handing me a document from her clipboard. "This is the HOA covenant you sign when you purchase the property. Section 8. Paragraph 3 grants the association authority to install utilities and community use facilities as deemed necessary." She handed me another paper. "And this," she said with a faint smirk, "is your special assessment notice for your share of the maintenance costs." I stared at the paper Margaret handed me, stunned. It was a formal notice charging me $200 a month for proportional maintenance costs of the public restroom, built on my land without my consent. "This is outrageous," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay composed. "You expect me to pay for maintaining a facility I never agreed to host?" "The assessment applies to all Oakridge Estates homeowners," Margaret replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we're in the middle of the ceremony." She turned her back on me, returning to the small crowd of business leaders and county reps as if I were a mere disruption. Just then, a hiker brushed past me to use the restroom, shooting me an annoyed glance, like I was in the way. I stood there, angry, humiliated, as they celebrated on my land, treating me like an interloper. My first attempt to push back were met with a wall of resistance. I filed complaints with local authorities, only to have them dismissed when the HOA produced forged documents claiming I'd approved the construction. Proving otherwise would require expensive forensic analysis and a drawn-out legal battle. I turned to neighbors, hoping to rally support, but found little sympathy. Homeowners near the trail had been offered discounts on their HOA fees in exchange for tolerating the increased traffic. Those farther away were told the new restroom would increase property values. No one wanted to rock the boat when they believed they were benefiting. Meanwhile, the daily disruptions escalated. Cars constantly blocked my driveway as hikers came and went. Early morning maintenance crews woke me up with industrial equipment. My once private home had become a busy corridor. A real estate agent friend brought worse news. A comparable corner lot in our neighborhood had recently sold for 40% less than expected due to privacy concerns and nonstop traffic. My property value was tanking, while local businesses, especially Margaret's husband's restaurants, boomed. Trailhead Brewery, Ridgeview Cafe, and Summit Snacks now advertise their proximity to new, convenient facilities in all their marketing. One weekend alone, Trailhead reportedly doubled its revenue. Then came the final insult, an HOA violation notice citing my unmaintained landscaping, the same landscaping they had destroyed during construction. The notice threatened fines unless I restore the plantings within 30 days, at my own expense. Each indignity stoked my fury. They thought they could wear me down, that I'd give up, but they had underestimated me. That night, watching yet another group of strangers use the restroom on my property, I made a decision. If they wanted to build on my land, I'd make them deeply regret it. The next morning, I waited until the maintenance crew left at 10 a.m. Then I grabbed my professional inspection kit from the garage. After 30 years as a health inspector, I knew exactly where to look, and I had a strong suspicion this facility, rushed to completion in under 2 weeks, would be riddled with violations. I was right. Over the next few hours, I conducted a comprehensive inspection of the entire facility. What I found was alarming. The sewage system was illegally connected to residential lines, violating half a dozen county regulations and putting nearby homes at risk of sewage backups. The water supply had been tapped directly into my residential system, causing a drop in my water pressure and creating a dangerous cross-connection without proper backflow prevention. Water samples from the fountain and taps showed bacterial contamination, a sign of poor pipe insulation. Chemical tests revealed runoff from improperly sealed fixtures was leaching into the surrounding soil. The ventilation system was grossly inadequate, allowing gas and odor to build up. Electrical wiring was exposed and unshielded in wet areas, a clear fire and shock hazard. By mid-afternoon, I had identified 37 distinct health and safety violations, 15 of them critical by city standards. I took photographs, collected samples, and documented everything with precision. Receipts in the maintenance closet confirmed what I already suspected. The facility had been thrown together in 10 days, with materials rushed and corners cut. The foundation was already showing signs of uneven settling, and cracks had formed in multiple walls. Moisture was seeping in, prime conditions for mold. It got worse. Soil tests from my flower beds showed contamination from septic runoff. The ground around the facility was already leaking. Most alarming of all, I found that waste in the restroom was not being treated properly before entering the residential sewer system, posing a wider public health risk. By the end of the day, I had compiled a dossier of violations that could result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, not to mention mandatory shutdown and remediation. But I didn't rush to file my report. I was waiting for the right moment, one they couldn't spin, bury, or ignore. That moment came just 3 days later. The HOA was hosting a community celebration at the neighborhood clubhouse. They'd invited business leaders, county officials, and tourism board reps to unveil Phase 2 of their community enhancement initiative. I arrived early, my inspection portfolio in hand, and took a seat in the front row. Margaret's eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. After some opening pleasantries, she took the podium, her ever-present clipboard in hand. A slide behind her showed hikers smiling outside the restroom on my property. In just the first month of operation, she announced proudly, we've seen a 70% increase in trail use and nearby businesses are flourishing. The business leaders nodded in approval. Margaret beamed as she revealed future plans, several new development sites, including 3 private properties I recognized. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood immediately. She hesitated, then forced a smile. Yes, Robert? A question about our successful initiative. I walked to the front, portfolio in hand. I should probably introduce myself properly, I said. Many of you know me as Robert Johnson, the homeowner whose property now features the new public restroom. What you may not know is that I'm also a senior health inspector for the City Health Department, with over 30 years of experience inspecting public facilities. The room fell dead silent. Margaret's clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the floor. I have some concerns about this successful initiative, I continued, opening my portfolio and placing photographs on the table. This is wildly inappropriate. Margaret snapped, trying to block the images. You're using your position for personal revenge. I'm here as a private citizen, Margaret, concerned about a public health hazard. The business owners leaned forward, examining the photographs. Richard Thornhill's face went pale as he studied the image of the illegal sewage connection. These are serious allegations, said a woman with a county badge. I've already filed official reports, I said, handing out copies. A full inspection team will be on site tomorrow morning. I switched the screen from Margaret's slideshow to my evidence. This water report, I said, highlighting a chart, shows contamination already exceeding safety standards, affecting not just restroom users, but the entire neighborhood's water supply. Gasps echoed through the room. Phones came out. Homeowners snapped pictures of the evidence. Margaret stood frozen. "This facility must be shut down immediately," said the county rep. "You can't do that." Richard burst out. "Do you know how much business we'll lose?" "If you're more worried about profits than public safety," I said evenly, "that's exactly why this whole project was doomed from the start." Margaret made one final attempt. "We have all the necessary permits." "Obtained through misrepresentation," I interrupted, displaying the falsified approvals. "I've already spoken to the permit office. They're very interested in how this project was pushed through." Right on cue, 2 uniformed health inspectors entered the room. "The facility is hereby closed," one announced, "effective immediately, by order of the City Health Department." Margaret's celebration had just turned into a full-blown disaster. By noon the next day, my property looked very different. Yellow caution tape surrounded the building. "Closed by order of Health Department" signs were posted on every door. 2 news vans parked across the street as disappointed hikers approached, reading the notices in confusion. The inspection team confirmed every violation I'd documented. And that was only the beginning. The lead inspector's face had grown increasingly grim with each step through the facility. "In my 20 years with the department," he told the assembled news crews, "I've never encountered this many critical violations in a single inspection. The contamination risks alone justify immediate closure. Structurally, this building is a hazard to public safety." Neighbors had gathered along the perimeter, many learning for the first time that the facility posed not just a nuisance, but a threat. When soil testing revealed that contaminants had already seeped into adjacent properties, the crowd's mood shifted from curiosity to outrage. By mid-afternoon, representatives from the HOA's insurance company arrived, accompanied by a team of attorneys. After reviewing the permits and inspection history, or lack thereof, the lead counsel made a call. Moments later, Margaret Thornhill was informed that the insurer would not cover any damages or remediation. The reason? Fraud. The permits had been obtained under false pretenses, and critical inspections had been skipped altogether. Within hours, the county commissioners convened an emergency session, publicly distancing themselves from the project and launching an official investigation into how it had been fast-tracked through their offices. Tourism officials scrubbed all references to the facility from promotional materials. The most seismic blow came when a class action lawsuit was announced on behalf of homeowners affected by the contamination. Their attorney, standing at the edge of my property, didn't mince words. "This is not just a lapse in judgment. It is a catastrophic failure of governance and a clear case of criminal negligence. We will seek full remediation and significant damages." As Margaret was leaving the site, freshly questioned by county officials, a process server intercepted her and handed over a thick stack of legal documents. From my porch, I watched her massive composure crack for the first time. The restroom that was supposed to bring prestige and profit had instead triggered environmental disaster, legal liability, and the unraveling of Margaret's carefully curated legacy. 2 days later, the community center overflowed for an emergency HOA meeting. Residents who had never set foot in one before packed the room, demanding answers. The board sat at a long table, visibly uncomfortable. Margaret was absent, on medical leave, according to the vice president. The meeting quickly descended into revelations. A retired accountant had combed through HOA financial records and discovered that board members had accepted consulting fees from the local business association, kickbacks for approving the project. A real estate agent presented hard numbers. Property values in the neighborhood had dropped, especially near the trail. Some homes had lost up to 15% in appraised value. Most disturbing were the stories of other residents whose properties had been altered without consent. One elderly couple found that surveyor stakes had been quietly moved 10 feet into their yard. Another discovered HOA plans to convert his side yard into a parking lot expansion. When the HOA's attorney tried to downplay these violations as procedural oversights, the room erupted in anger. Then, Someone projected images of future development plans. Phase 2. The plan showed additional restrooms and facilities scattered across the neighborhood, all on private land with convenient trail access. A cold silence filled the room. That's when I stood and asked to speak. The room quieted. "I've lived here for 3 years," I said, "and until now I've kept to myself. That was my mistake. When we stopped paying attention to how our community is governed, we opened the door to abuse." I laid out how this project wasn't just a zoning issue or construction dispute. It was a betrayal of trust, of property rights, of the basic principle that no one has a right to repurpose what isn't theirs. This isn't about a building, I concluded. It's about whether we're free to control our own properties, or if we live at the mercy of whoever happens to hold a gavel. By the end of the meeting, the board was gone, unanimously voted out. An interim committee was formed. Margaret Thornhill's reign of unchecked power was officially over. The courthouse was packed for first hearing of what the media had dubbed Restroom Gate. 3 cases had been consolidated: my property rights suit, the class action contamination suit, and the county's enforcement case. Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach to land disputes, presided as the evidence was presented. Falsified permits, toxicology reports, financial records revealing conflict of interest. Her expression turned increasingly severe. Margaret, now represented by a separate attorney, looked haggard, defeated. When shown evidence tying her directly to the fake permits, she broke. "We thought it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission," she admitted on the stand. "The location was perfect. We didn't think Mr. Johnson would fight back." Judge Martinez's ruling was swift and uncompromising. The HOA was ordered to remove the structure and restore my land entirely at their expense. Damages were awarded that far exceeded my initial property loss. Most importantly, the judge referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges: fraud, environmental violations, conspiracy. "This court will not tolerate such blatant disregard for private property and public safety," she said, bringing down her gavel. Over the next 3 weeks, my property was transformed. Under court supervision, the restroom was torn down, the contaminated soil removed, and the land fully restored. Enhanced, even. Where that eyesore had stood, a tranquil water feature now flowed, surrounded by native plants and a new collection of Japanese maples, more vibrant than the ones I'd lost. My fence was rebuilt, sturdier and more attractive. Drainage issues that had existed for years were corrected. I had gone from a neighborhood pariah to its most sought-after voice. I helped rewrite the HOA bylaws, introducing strict requirements for homeowner consent and full transparency for all board decisions. No project touching private property could move forward without documented approval. As for Margaret Thornhill, she was sentenced to community service. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when she was assigned to the county trail maintenance program, often seen picking up trash just yards from my now pristine corner lot. The restroom built to exploit my land had become the downfall of a corrupt regime. It triggered reform, justice, and a renewed commitment to homeowner rights. They tried to profit from my silence. Instead, they ran headfirst into the one person who knew exactly how to shut them down. Sometimes justice doesn't require a war, just the right expertise at the right moment. Before you steal someone's property, make damn sure you know who you're dealing with. Businessmen shifted uncomfortably. One leaned in to whisper to another. Meanwhile, hikers continued streaming in and out of the new restroom. Some cast curious glances toward our confrontation, but most went about their business, as if the facility had always been there. "Now, Robert," Margaret said in that patronizing tone she had mastered, "the HOA has easement rights for community improvements. This is all perfectly legal and documented. We sent multiple notices about the project." "I never received any notices," I said flatly, "and no easement gives you the right to build an entire structure on my property." She sighed, dramatically, like she was dealing with a particularly stubborn child. The board voted unanimously. "This improvement adds value to the entire community, including your property. The increased foot traffic benefits local businesses, which boosts the overall economic health of our neighborhood." A man in an expensive suit stepped forward. "I'm Richard Thornhill," he said, chair of the Business Association. "We're very appreciative of the community's contribution to local tourism. These facilities were desperately needed." So this was Margaret's husband, the owner of Trailhead Brewery, the one who stood to profit most from this little land grab. I noticed the brewery's logo on the pin clipped to his lapel. "I don't care what the board voted," I said, my voice rising. "This is my land. You had no right." "Actually, we had every right," Margaret interrupted smoothly, pulling a paper from her clipboard and handing it to me. "This is the HOA covenant you sign when purchasing your property. Section 8, Paragraph 3, grants the association authority to install utilities and community facilities as needed." Then she handed me another document. "And this is the special assessment notice for your share of maintenance costs." I looked down. It was a formal notice, charging me $200 a month for upkeep of the very restroom they had built on my land, without permission. "This is outrageous," I said, barely able to contain my anger. "You expect me to pay for maintaining a public restroom I never agreed to have?" "The assessment applies to all Oakridge homeowners," she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we're in the middle of ceremony." She turned her back on me, rejoining the assembled business people as if I were a minor nuisance. A hiker brushed past me to enter the restroom, shooting me an annoyed glance like I was blocking a public thoroughfare. I stood there, humiliated and furious, watching them celebrate on my property, treating me like the intruder. My first attempt to fight back were met with wall after wall of resistance. I filed complaints with local authorities, only to have them dismissed when the HOA produced documents claiming I had approved construction. The signatures were obvious forgeries, but proving that would require expensive forensic analysis and a drawn-out legal battle. I tried rallying neighbors, only to discover how thoroughly the HOA had manipulated them. Homeowners nearest the trail had received reductions in their monthly dues as a kind of hush money. Those farther out were told the restroom would boost property values. Few were willing to rock the boat. Meanwhile, the impact on my life was immediate and devastating. Cars frequently blocked my driveway. Early morning maintenance crews shattered any sense of peace. Strangers were constantly visible from my windows, my privacy gone. A real estate agent friend delivered the worst news. A similar corner lot had recently sold for 40% less than expected. Buyers were spooked by the public traffic and lack of privacy. My home's value was in free fall, even as Margaret's husband plastered his brewery's ads with phrases like "steps away from new trail facilities." Weekend revenue at Trailhead Brewery had reportedly doubled. Then, to top it off, I received a violation notice from the HOA for unmaintained landscaping. They were referring to the flower beds and hedges they themselves had destroyed during construction. The letter threatened fines if I didn't restore them within 30 days, at my own expense. Each insult, each abuse of power fueled my fury. They were steamrolling me, clearly confident I'd eventually roll over and accept it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, I watched another group of hikers file into the restroom, and I made a decision. If they wanted to build on my land, I'd make damn sure they'd regret it. The next morning, after the maintenance crew left at 10 a.m., I went into my garage and grabbed my inspection kit, the same one I'd used for 30 years as a senior health inspector. I knew exactly what to look for, and I had a strong suspicion that a facility thrown up in less than 2 weeks would be riddled with shortcuts. I was right. My inspection revealed a staggering list of violations. The sewage system, illegally tied into residential lines, not commercial-grade infrastructure. That alone violated 6 separate codes and posed a backup risk for nearby homes. The water supply tapped into my own residential line, which explained the sudden drop in water pressure. Worse, they hadn't installed proper backflow prevention. I took samples and ran tests on site. The water showed bacterial contamination and signs of chemical runoff, likely from poorly sealed fixtures and improper pipework. The ventilation was a joke, completely inadequate for a public facility. Dangerous gases could build up over time. Electrical wiring, substandard, with unshielded connections in damp areas. Clear fire and electrocution risks. I documented everything meticulously, Photos, water samples, soil tests, measurements. By the afternoon, I had cataloged 37 separate health and safety violations, at least 15 of them classified as critical by official standards. Then I found receipts, carelessly left in a maintenance closet, rush order materials, double price for emergency delivery. They had thrown the whole thing together in 10 days, working around the clock, cutting every corner imaginable. Cracks were already forming in the foundation. Water seeped into the walls during heavy use. An ideal breeding ground for black mold. Soil samples from my garden beds showed chemical seepage. The septic system was already leaking into the surrounding area. And most damning of all, the facility's waste was not being treated properly. It posed a neighborhood-wide contamination threat. By the evening, I had a bulletproof case. But I didn't submit it immediately. I waited for the perfect moment, one where Margaret and her backers couldn't spin the narrative or bury the facts. That moment came 3 days later. The HOA was hosting a community partnership celebration at the clubhouse. Invitations had gone out to business owners, tourism officials, and even county representatives. The event's centerpiece? A presentation celebrating the success of the new Restroom initiative and unveiling plans for future expansion. I arrived early, portfolio in hand, and took a front row seat. Margaret's expression tightened when she saw me, but she turned back to the podium to prepare. The room filled quickly, neighbors, business leaders, and people with county government badges. Margaret took the microphone, all smiles. As you know, Oakridge Estates has undertaken an innovative community partnership that benefits both residents and local commerce. Slides clicked on the projector. Smiling hikers, statistics about increased trail use, graphs showing business revenue spikes. We completed the project under budget and ahead of schedule. We're now exploring Phase 2. She clicked to a new map. I recognized several targeted sites, 3 of them private properties, including one owned by a retired couple I knew. When she opened the floor to questions, I raised my hand immediately. She hesitated, but then nodded stiffly. Yes, Robert. A question about our successful initiative. I stood, walked calmly to the front, and placed my portfolio on the podium. I should introduce myself properly, I said, pulling out my badge. Many of you know me as Robert Johnson, the homeowner whose property now hosts this facility. But what you may not know, I said, holding up my ID, is that I am also a senior health inspector for the city, with 30 years of experience evaluating commercial and public sanitation facilities. The room fell silent. Margaret's clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. And I have some concerns, I continued, opening my portfolio, that I believe the community deserves to hear. Homeowners exchanged uneasy glances. Several pulled out their phones, snapping pictures of the documents I displayed as evidence. This facility must be shut down immediately, the county public health representative declared, now fully engaged. Until a complete inspection is conducted. You can't do that. Richard, Thornhill blurted. Do you have any idea how much business we'll lose if you're more concerned about business than public safety, I interrupted calmly, then that's exactly what's wrong with how this project was conceived and executed. Margaret made one last desperate attempt to regain control. The HOA has all necessary permits and approvals, obtained through misrepresentation. I cut in, holding up the falsified documents. I've already spoken to the permit office. They're very interested in how approvals were rushed through without proper inspections. As if on cue, 2 uniformed health department officials entered the room. I had called them ahead of the meeting, knowing that official backup would be necessary. The facility is being closed, effective immediately, the senior officer announced, by order of the city health department. Margaret's carefully orchestrated celebration had just become her worst nightmare. By noon the next day, my property had been transformed from a convenient stop for tourists into a restricted quarantine zone. Yellow caution tape surrounded the building, and bold, closed by order of health department. Signs were plastered across every door. 2 news vans were parked across the street. Reporters filmed as disappointed hikers turned away, pausing to read the posted warnings. The official inspection team arrived promptly at 8 a.m. and conducted a thorough examination. Not only did they confirm every violation I had documented. They found even more. As the inspection wore on, the lead inspector's expression darkened. "In my 20 years with the department," he told the assembled media, "I've never seen so many critical violations in a single facility. The contamination risks alone require immediate closure. The structural issues make this building dangerous to occupy." Neighbors began gathering at the perimeter, many hearing for the first time about the health risks. When soil testing revealed that contaminants had already seeped into adjacent properties, the mood shifted from curiosity to anger. By mid-afternoon, the HOA's insurance company had arrived, accompanied by legal counsel. After reviewing the evidence, the lead attorney made a phone call, then delivered devastating news to Margaret. The policy would not cover any damages or remediation, because the permits were obtained fraudulently, he said, and required inspections were skipped. This is a breach of coverage. Later that day, county commissioners held an emergency session. They publicly distanced themselves from the project and launched a formal investigation into how the HOA had fast-tracked approvals without oversight. Tourism officials removed all references to the facility from their promotional materials. Most notably, a class action lawsuit was already forming. Affected homeowners, concerned about contamination, had retained counsel. Their attorney held a press conference at the edge of my property. "This represents a catastrophic failure of HOA governance and potentially criminal negligence," she announced. "The affected homeowners will seek full remediation and substantial damages." As Margaret left the site after questioning by county officials, a process server intercepted her with a thick stack of legal notices. I watched from my porch as she accepted the documents, her once commanding posture visibly collapsing. The restroom that was supposed to bring tourists and profits had instead unleashed health hazards, legal liability, and the collapse of Margaret Thornhill's ambitions.